Right, so hello and welcome everyone to our special Q&A session of the medical debate. We are very lucky to have a current Oxford medical student with us today to answer all of our questions. Michael, if you wouldn't mind giving a bit of an introduction and what your favourite part of being at Oxford is.
Yeah, of course. So, hey guys, I'm Michael. Just before I give the proper introduction, I do want to say, well, thank you all firstly for coming. It's great, and extremely sorry for what happened earlier, especially since Shabazz was in contact with me, and for some reason I put the time as 11 on Sunday instead of 11 today. But I'm so glad you can all make it right now. Yeah, so I'm currently a medical student at Oxford. I think the favorite thing by far is actually the diversity of students you're dealing with. So you're getting completely different perspectives from all over the world. So I find that I'm usually learning a lot of things, not even from the medical side, but just from the people I'm interacting with. So different ways about approaching life, different mindsets, just new lessons, which is, I would probably say, the biggest thing that Oxford has to offer. So if anyone's interested in applying, yeah, I would definitely recommend it.
Right, thank you for the introduction. Shabazz?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, yeah, thank you very much, Michael, for coming. I'm sure our audience has been really looking forward to this, and I'm sure they have lots of questions to ask. So I'm just going to outline how the session's going to work. So as I'm sure you can see in the chat, I've put a list of kind of different topics. I'm going to split the session into these sort of topics. And so you can, the audience, you can use the chat to ask your questions. And you can find that there's a chat box at the bottom. If you click that, it will bring up the chat. And you can just type in your questions there. And we'd like you to sort of stick to the theme that we're on. And then, so that should be able to cover all the kind of questions you want to ask. And then Michael should be able to see those questions, and he'll be able to, choose the questions that he wants to answer, and he'll be able to answer them. So the first topic we're going to look at is life at Oxford, the medicine course at Oxford, and kind of maybe why Michael chose Oxford. So if you'd like to start asking questions about that, yeah, and we'll spend around 10 minutes on each question. Oh yeah, yeah, so the list there, hopefully you can all see it. So yeah, it's about, let's start with life at Oxford, and I think I'll start by asking a question. Michael, why did you choose Oxford really in the first place when you were applying? And obviously you can only choose one out of Oxford and Cambridge. So maybe why did you go to choose Oxford rather than Cambridge?
So it's quite a funny story. I think right at the beginning, I had no intention of applying to either Oxford or Cambridge. And the reason that was because I thought it was kind of completely out of my reach. I didn't really feel like I could even get interviews from either of those unis. But having done some research, I just decided that I might as well. There was nothing to lose to applying to either Cambridge or Oxford. And actually, at the beginning, I was a bit set on applying to Cambridge, and especially Queen's College at Cambridge. But I think my heart was always in Oxford. So very last minute, I kind of changed my application from Queen's College, Cambridge to St. Peter's College, Oxford, which is where I am right now. And I didn't even really have time to visit the uni or anything. It was more of, I did a very, very quick informal search on the student room, just picked the college that was the friendliest, because again, I didn't really, I didn't know too much about Oxford, and I just kind of knew a lot of stereotypes of how a lot of students can be quite pretentious and stuff. So I was like, I might as well pick the friendliest college, which was St. Peter's, according to the student room, and probably is indeed the friendliest college. I think what's great about Oxford, what probably drew me more about Oxford than anything else, is the fact that, again, what I said at the beginning, you've got a massive diversity of people. You've got people who are at the top of their fields, So whatever specialty you're whatever thing you're interested in medicine, whether it's genetics, so at the time I was really interested in cancer and genetics and stuff, you're going to be talking with some of the top people in that field. And the idea of just having top mentors from the field really captivated me, I guess.
Thank you. So I personally had a question as well for life at Oxford. Why do you think that going to Oxford or Oxbridge in general is incredibly different to going to, let's say, a different medical college or any other medical college?
I think it's more intense. I think it definitely is more intense. So having just talked to like a few friends from like Imperial and UCL, Imperial, they seem to be chilling, especially first year at Imperial. They're just enjoying life, which is fair. I think it's definitely a lot more intense, and the reason it's more intense is because you've, on top of all the medical work that standard universities will have, you've got to write essays, and you've got to write between 2 to 3 essays a week. And along with those essays, you've also got tutorials, and they're quite intense tutorials where you'll have 2 students per teacher or so, or per tutor. And so you have to do a lot more independent study outside of lectures and seminars and stuff. So yeah, it's definitely more intense. I think another thing is the fact that you're divided into colleges means that you get to form way stronger relationships with friends and colleagues within your colleges, which is not really something you get in other unis in general. So not even like, this is outside of medicine, but just in other unis, because it's a whole campus based rather than collegiate. I guess you kind of get to choose your group. So it's the benefit of the college system is that you've got your own close community, but the disadvantage is you don't have, I guess, as wide of a pool of people to choose from. Like you still do, but it's not as easily accessible as in other universities. Other than that, of course, what also makes Oxford and Cambridge different from other unis is the idea that they do 3 years of preclinical. So I've had basically no patient contact. Like I can't talk to patients. Like I can tell you what bacteria they're infected with, but at the moment, compared to all the other unis, I'm awful with talking to patients. And that's because we have 3 years of preclinical, 3 years of clinical, rather than the more common, it's all kind of mixed together approach of unis at the moment. So, yeah.
Oh, thank you. One of the questions we've had today is how was the transition from sixth form to Oxford University?
How was the transition? I'll say it's quite intense. It's quite intense, just because I think it's a number of things. I think it really depends how you actually approach it. So you've got to realize that you're not going to be, except if you're working extremely hard, which I actually wouldn't recommend, you're probably not going to be anywhere near the top of your year. Just because there are people who, just like absolute kind of like geniuses. And I don't mean that they're not naturally geniuses, but these are people who have kind of devoted their whole lives to medicine since the age of like 5. So they kind of know everything already. So I think you've kind of got to realize that. The second thing is, so yeah, I think it really depends what your approach is. So if your approach is a more chilled one, then it's not too bad. But if you're like, you've just got to make sure that you come in with the approach that suits you the most. So if you want to have a more academic based transition from sixth form to Oxford, then make sure to do that and just to do what your intentions are. If you want to have a more chilled approach, do that. But you've got to make sure that your mindset is a kind of a positive growth mindset. So in QE, I don't know, I just remember we had like one of those presentations from Miss Coleman. I don't know if she's still, I think she does teach there, of just the importance of the growth mindset. Don't go in with a fixed, you know, this is who I am, this is what I must do, because it means that you can approach the uni from a you can kind of approach the uni from your preset stereotypes, which means that it doesn't give you the freedom to adapt. And what I'm saying kind of makes no sense to you guys at the moment. I think it's one of those things where you kind of need to experience it. So what I'm basically saying is, whatever uni you go to, make sure that you approach it from an idea of adaptability, and also an idea that you're not different from the people around you, okay? So you're as intelligent as the people around you. You deserve to be there. You're not more intelligent than the people around you. And these are just, it's no longer a competition, okay? So I think in school, things can be a bit within the school. It's usually competitive in the sense that you just need to get the grades. But once you're in uni, it's not really, especially for medicine, it's not really as much of an issue. As long as you're passing, you're doing fine. So you've got to approach it from a growth mindset, or else the transition becomes difficult. Because, yeah, it's everything's on a much bigger scale now. So you can't approach it with the same way that you approach school. So sorry if that doesn't make too much sense, but it's one of those things where just relax, just enjoy the transition, and just learn as you're transitioning and changing.
Cool. I had a question like that I've always been confused about, because the university system is very different to the school system. When you have lectures and things and tutorials, could you explain how that works? Because I know that it's very different with Oxbridge than it is with most other unis.
Yeah, so I think what makes us different mainly is the tutorial system. So usually you'll have lectures in the morning from about 9 to 1. Tutorials will usually be in the evening, which is why kind of work-life balance, not really, well, yeah, it's there, but I think it kind of all gets quashed together, so it actually becomes quite fun, but we can talk about that later. So you usually have tutorials in the evening, and it's an evening that the tutor will organize. You might actually have them on the weekend sometimes, which is what our tutor made us do, because he was mean. And yeah, for those tutorials, you usually need to prepare an essay, and you need to have read up on the content. And the tutor will usually take it as a time to kind of probe you and make sure that you really understand what you're saying, rather than just like memorize some random stuff. And on top of, so those are the tutorials and the lectures. We'll also usually have some seminars, which are kind of like small groups. So maybe groups of like 10 or people with a tutor discussing a certain topic. And that's pretty much it. So I think what makes us really different from other unis is this idea of the tutorials, which are 2 students per tutor. It's a bit like an interview situation, so an Oxbridge interview situation, where they will kind of try and push your understanding of a subject.
Thank you. Shivas?
Yeah, so I think in the chat, someone's asked, do you have more opportunities for research as a medical student compared to other unis? So, you know, they're asking at Oxford specifically, would you be able to, you know, do they encourage research? Obviously, because, you know, you have 3 years preclinical, and so you don't have that much patient contact. Does that give you a chance to perhaps learn more about different aspects of medicine and that kind of thing? Or do you think maybe you're restricted by the preclinical years?
So they've got a far greater approach of research. And what I mean by that is a lot of the tutorials and a lot of the lectures and stuff. In fact, to gain certain marks within exams, you've got to include experimental evidence just from generic research that's been carried out. And and so what a lot of actually doctors in Oxford say is that the first 3 years are actually not designed to make you a good doctor necessarily. They're designed to make you a good scientist and to think like a scientist. So in that sense, they do encourage research. The other thing is also in 3rd year, you get to do an 8-week research project as part of the degree on usually something you're interested in. And a lot of 3rd year is, so 3rd year is the intercalated year. So you do get to do this in other universities as well. A lot of 3rd year is just reading kind of primary research. So that's research that has just, been written by authors rather than research that, like, rather than things called meta-analyses where a single author has then collected lots of other previous research and simplified it. So in that sense, they do. However, what I would say is that I don't think they give you any, I don't think being at Oxford necessarily, or at least directly, gives you more research opportunities. So I think had I been at Imperial or UCL or even somewhere like Nottingham or Birmingham, I think if you're really interested in research and you're willing to put in the effort to try and contact people, then you will get placements. It's not an issue. Going to Oxford might simplify that process a bit just because of the name. But other than that, so there aren't any systems within the Oxford medicine degree itself that increases your ability to get research placements.
Cool. Thank you. Just on the same vein where you have lots of different things happening, especially with tutorials and stuff, what is a normal day in the life of a medical student at Oxford like?
Yeah, so I think it really varies, but an average day would be waking up or I guess your day starting at 9, have lectures from about 9 to 12, well actually 9 to 1, a lunch break from about 1 to 2. Sometimes you'll have more lectures from 2 onwards. Sometimes you'll have tutorials instead at that time, so it depends on how your timetable is looking. What you'll usually then do is you'll probably either go with your friends to a library and work on some tutorial work, or go to your room and work on some tutorial work on your own if you prefer working on your own, and then prep for a tutorial, perhaps like 3 or 4 hours. That doesn't happen every day, so that's just a standard day. So that leaves you to about 6, get some dinner. What then a lot of people like to do is actually, like if there's any events going on, they'll go to an event. If there's like a talk at the Oxford Union, so we're quite lucky at Oxford that the union's quite a big thing, so you can kind of attract big speakers, so you can kind of listen to usually some quite big speakers. If there's a society you're interested in, you could get involved. If like going out is your thing, you can do that. So I think it's a lot of work, but I think it's very easy to kind of mix work and kind of socializing at the same time, because you can kind of work a lot with your friends. If there's quite a difficult problem in a tutorial, you can kind of work on it together. And usually you're actually with like people who are very passionate about their field as well. So you can sometimes end up having like really long conversations about some very cool, I don't know, research you guys have found or something. So I would say that's a standard day.
Actually sounds really cool. Just in the same vein, how like obviously the med student life is quite hectic.
Yeah.
How great are the opportunities to get involved with extracurriculars? Do you have enough time to do that, or?
Yeah, I think so. I think the one thing I would say is once you're in uni, a bit related to what I was saying earlier, you get to decide what you want to do. So if you want to try and end up being in like the top decile or top 2 deciles in school in your year, especially at somewhere like Oxford, then you probably won't have time for extracurricular or societies. You'll be working very hard to get into those top 2 deciles. if you've actually decided, you know, I'm at uni, I'm doing medicine, my score doesn't really matter, which it doesn't. So I can, if you guys want, I can kind of show you how, because so your scores in school, they're important. But once you enter med school, your actual scores aren't that important for how you progress as a doctor. So if you decide, actually, I would much rather kind of diversify my interests, then you can definitely do that as well. So you can, it'll probably mean you're spending less time on work, but that time can then be devoted to joining societies or getting, just getting involved in a number of stuff. So for example, at the moment, I'm the science and technology editor for one of the newspapers in Oxford. And I found the time to also be involved within the MetSoc, so I'm also the welfare representative there. What it does mean is I've usually got less time to do work, but I think that's fine, because I'm not extremely bothered about being in the top decile, just because I know that it won't give me as much benefit as the other activities I'm doing.
Cool, thank you. You were saying earlier that obviously you know, if you wanted to be one of the complete top, or you know, top, that obviously takes away lots of time. So that means you can't exactly become active in the extracurricular side of things. Do you think that it's unachievable to become like the top student if you haven't devoted your whole life to medicine since 5 years old?
It's definitely not unachievable. No, I think honestly, it's all about how hard you work. So even the amount you've worked previously doesn't really necessarily determine it. So what makes medicine different from other subjects is it's extremely content based, unlike something like politics and economics or philosophy, where you can usually have a bit of an aptitude for a subject. So if you're willing to put the work in, and you can still put the work in and have a good work-life balance, you've just got to be very disciplined with the way you approach it. If you're willing to put the work in, and you're willing to be intelligent with your studying and smart with the way that you cover content, so that you cover it in a way which I guess maximizes your intentions. So if your intentions are to get very high marks, then doing it in a exam focused way, then I see no reason why you can't be one of the top students. Just make sure that you're doing it you understand why you're aiming high, because in order to aim high and do well, you have to sacrifice usually, and you've just got to make sure that the sacrifice is worth it for you.
Cool, thank you. Shivas?
Yeah, so someone's asked a bit of a different question about the cost and the length of the course. So if you'd like to, you know, sort of give a bit of information on that. And, you know, obviously we know medicine is a longer course than most other courses. So, you know, are you a fan of that? Do you like that? And do you think that will benefit you? Or would you have preferred it if it was a shorter course?
I think it's very difficult to argue for it to be a shorter course, just because there's a lot of content in general. And so if it was shorter, you'd have to cover the same content in a shorter period of time, which is too intense. I mean, it's already quite a lot of work. So Oxford's medical degree and Oxford's medical degree and a few other universities are 6 years long, and that's because they do an intercalated year in the middle. That year isn't not necessary for you to be a doctor. So you can actually do medicine in 5 years, and that's what a lot of other universities offer, such as King's, Nottingham, Birmingham, and you can just check according to which uni. It does mean that you're at a slight disadvantage when you're applying for foundation year jobs, but it's not that big of a disadvantage, and it's not worth an extra year out of your life just so you can do slightly better when applying for foundation jobs. The cost, so like any other I guess actually medicine is quite good in the sense that you're getting a very, very good deal, in the sense that usually it would cost 50,000. So it costs £50,000 to fund a medical student, and the government takes a very large proportion of that. So the government pays for about 40,000. The student pays for 9,000, which of course you could also borrow, or 9,250, which you can borrow from student loans and stuff. So you're getting a good deal compared to somewhere like the States, where lots of students would have to pay 50K a year privately, or would have to borrow all of those. Accommodation costs really depends on where you're living. So Oxford's actually quite an expensive city, which means that you would be paying around £7,000 for rent, which isn't cheap. It's cheaper than London. London, of course, is quite expensive. Cambridge is also slightly expensive, but a bit cheaper than Oxford. Again, there are many bursaries and scholarships available to those who come from I think, family household income of, so it depends on which scholarship and bursary, but usually it's under about 30,000, which means that you can get significant help and just reduced costs on those. So I think it definitely, cost is an important thing to consider, but I feel like it should never be something that puts you off medicine, because firstly, you'll be getting a decent amount of money once you start working as a doctor. Not at the beginning, but once you start reaching higher levels such as residency and consultancy levels. And there are lots of support systems out there to deal with it, if that makes sense. If anyone's got any specific question about costs, just let me know.
Cool. And one major question I thought was, obviously, Oxford is known as one of the top academic medical colleges. And in that vein, assessment-wise, when you go to assessments in Oxford, how are they? What are they like? And also, is it important that your memory has to be amazing, or your memorization skills have to be amazing to do well?
So the first thing I want to say is, if you've done enough to get into Oxford, or get into any medical university for that matter, you've got the skills to succeed there. It's extremely competitive. They've done everything they can to make it difficult for you guys to get into medicine. So if you get in, don't worry, you've definitely got the skills to succeed. You've definitely got the memory as well to succeed. So in terms of the way they assess you, Oxford and Cambridge's system is quite different from other medical universities, in the sense that they put a lot of pressure on essays. So when you actually get to do your exams, you have 2 different exams for each module. There's 4 modules per year. You'll have an essay-based exam, which is actually what they rank you based on. And you have a multiple choice exam, which you've just got to pass. And if you pass that, regardless of whether you get 100% or about 70%, which is a pass mark, you've passed, and they won't look at that again. So it's extremely essay-based. Again, don't worry if you're thinking, oh, I'm not too good at essays. There's a reason that I took biochem maths. It's because I didn't want to do any of the essay subjects, because you will get used to writing essays very quickly. And yeah, there are ways to improve. I was someone who wasn't a great fan of essays, and you adapt quickly, so don't worry at all. One thing to note is, and I really would not make this a key part of deciding which uni you want to apply to, but the way that the foundation scheme works, so after you finish your 6 or 5 years of medical university, you apply for foundation, your foundation years as a junior doctor. And the way that they rank it is they give you a score depending on your rank within your medical school. So technically, if you're at a better medical school, it's going to be harder to get a slightly higher ranking because you're competing within that medical school, which is likely. So if you're at a top medical school or a highly academic medical school, you're likely to find that you have to work harder to be in a specific position. I really would not let that affect your judgment at all in defining which medical schools you apply to, just because that ranking only makes up a very small proportion. So your within medical school ranking makes up a very small proportion of your application to foundation schools. And once the application to foundation hospitals is over, they never look at your university rankings ever again. And so it would be unfair to base 5 or 6 years of a potential university life just on the outcome of the 2 foundation years that you'll eventually be applying to. Yeah, anything else on assessments? No, one thing I would also say is that we have something called collections, which happen on a termly basis, where just before you go back to uni, you have an exam, which means that you usually need to spend a bit of your Christmas and Easter break preparing for that exam. Other universities or medical universities, except from Cambridge, don't have this, which means that they have a far more chilled Christmas and Easter break. So that's something I'll definitely consider. So if you want to have a bit more of a chilled uni life, I guess, then perhaps, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. And I think we'll ask one more question in this section about Oxford and the medical degree, and then we might move on to the Ucat Bmat personal statement. So this question I've got is, does Oxford make you become a doctor solely, or can you do other things in the medicinal field with a medical degree? So i.e. when you finished your degree and you decide, I don't want to be a doctor, or, you know, I want to do something which is less patient-based and maybe more in terms of research, would that be possible? And is it easier to do that if you have your degree from somewhere like Oxford than at another university?
Yes, definitely. So especially if you're considering research as either a backup or something that complements your medical journey, then Oxford or Cambridge are the place for you, because the fact that the medical degree is fractured is kind of divided into preclinical and clinical means that if you finish your preclinical and you actually find, oh, I love research, and actually I don't really like people that much, and you decide to go into research, then you can very easily do that. So some people actually finish, there's been a lot of famous scientists that have actually done this. They do the first 3 years of their degree at Oxford or Cambridge, or even sometimes at Imperial or UCL. And then they'll be like, actually, I want to do a PhD. And so then they'll do a PhD. And then once they've done their PhD, they'll usually find that actually they like research far more than they like medicine. So they'll stick with going down the research path and don't continue the medical path. What they could have also done is done 3 years of preclinical, 3 years of a PhD. And then if they really wanted to, finish the 3 years of clinical. So that would mean 9 years at uni, but it would mean that you would graduate with a PhD as well as a medical degree. And you would have also explored that research path that you might have been interested in. So I think Oxford really gives you the ability to do that. I would also say, regardless of which uni you go to, a medical degree doesn't necessarily mean you've got to go into medicine. Having said that, though, I think it really helps that you do go into medicine after, just because you've invested 6 years of your life in a medical degree, so you might as well have done something like biology or chemistry. But if after finishing your medical degree, you find, actually, I don't really want to be a doctor, or you find that you have other interests as well, then you can explore those interests. So you can work for a biotech company. You can combine being a doctor with other interests. So you can kind of volunteer in impoverished countries or in countries where there's war zones. So like a medical degree will open so many doors. It's not only about doing medicine. And if you're especially interested in research, Oxford and Cambridge are the places to do it in, because it will give you that freedom.
Right. Thank you very much. I think that's very insightful for lots of people here. So we're going to move on to the Ucat, Bmat, and personal statement. And obviously you would have done the Bmat for Oxford. I don't know if you did the Ucat, but I just wanted to ask quite a broad question. So how did you go about preparing for these tests? I know Medify is quite a popular resource. Did you use that, would you recommend Medify or maybe any other resources to any of the people here who are looking to do these tests?
Oh, sorry, I'm not trying to butt in or anything, but did you do the Ucat? Because, like Shabazz said, you did.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'll start with the Ucat. I would definitely do both the Ucat and the Bmat. I think doing only the Bmat is a very, very risky thing to do, and is slightly arrogant in the sense that it assumes that you'll do well. Because if you don't do well in the Bmat, which is, I think it's harder to do well in the Bmat than in the Ucat, then you've closed all the doors for yourself. On the other hand, if you find that you don't want to apply to any Bmat unis and you want to only do the Ucat, fair enough, because you do the Ucat. So the big difference between the Ucat and the Bmat is that you do the Ucat before you apply to the universities you want to apply to. And so you've got your mark, and then you hand in your application to whatever universities you want to apply to, okay? Which means that if you do bad in the Ucat, or if you do like meh but not amazing, you can almost know which unis you just won't be able to get an interview from anyway, so you can avoid applying to those unis. That's not the case with the Bmat. Well, actually, with the Bmat, you can now do it on 2 dates. You can do it on September, which is before your application to unis, because you apply to medical unis on the 15th of October. Or you could do it in November, which is after. So if you do it in November, then you're applying to universities without having your Bmat score. And so it's slightly risky because, yeah, you don't have all the information you need yet. Having said that, having said that, the way that Oxford currently works, and I do hope they change this because I don't know what they're doing, is that you can only do the November sitting at the moment. Not too sure why, but they don't accept any Bmat scores from the September sitting. And if you've sat the September Bmat and you apply to Oxford, they will immediately reject you, regardless of how good everything else is. And so if you're applying to Oxford, you're probably doing the Bmat in November. And that's just how the Ucat and the Bmat work. In terms of the Ucat, yeah, Medify is brilliant, like 100% recommend it. Like if there's one resource out there which I'd recommend, it's Medify, because it simulates the real exam situation, because you're going to be doing the Ucat on a computer. It gives you plenty of practice questions, gives you really, really good mocks. It also has a very kind of targeted approach. So if it finds that you're doing bad with a particular question type, it will encourage you to practice that question type more. So if there's one resource you're going to use, it's Medify. It's a tad expensive. So from what I remember, it was like £50 for 3 months or something. But it's definitely a investment. So it's definitely an investment I would recommend, because it's the best resource for UCAT. For UCAT, I'd recommend studying, it's not really one of those study things, it's entirely practice, because it's kind of like verbal reasoning, quantitative reasoning questions, abstract reasoning. So for those who kind of apply to grammar schools, it's a bit like, actually it might have changed for you guys, but so when I was applying for grammar schools, we had to do verbal reasoning, maths, abstract reasoning, or they called it non-verbal reasoning, and English. So it's very similar to that, and so you can't really learn anything for it. It's just practicing. And I don't, from what I've seen, because I've tutored a lot of students with both the Ucat and the Bmat, practicing for a longer period of time does not necessarily make your score improve. I think it's about doing quite concentrated, intense practice leading up to the exam, which is focused on your weakest subjects more than anything else, because there's no point of practicing the sections you're the strongest at. With the Bmat, it's divided into 3 sections. The first section is a kind of problem-solving section, a science section, a science and maths section. So they'll ask you biology, chemistry, physics, and maths questions, which are usually a bit higher than GCSE level. And the third section is an essay section, where they will usually give you 3 or 4 essays, ask you to pick one, write on it, and you'll have half an hour to write the essay. But the catch is the essay must only be a single side long. If it's longer than a side, they won't accept it. And so you've got to be very selective with the information you use. And so with the Bmat, preparing for section 2 in advance is a useful thing to do. But for the other sections, again, concentrated, intense, and specific practice is the best thing to do. The one thing I would say is, do not worry at all about the Ucat and the Bmat at the moment. So I think I know, I'm not too sure if everyone else is in the same situation, but I'm guessing the current year 12 or like oncoming year 12 students have just finished GCSEs. So the most important thing at the moment for you guys is to make sure that you get your predicted grades for AS. So you want to try and do as well as possible, and to really make sure that medicine is what you want to do, because you don't want to commit to something for 6 years that you actually find, 1 or 2 years in that, you don't want to do it, because it's a difficult journey. It's not as great and rewarding as a lot of people make it out to be. So do your work experience, do your volunteering, read around the subject, make sure that whatever unis you're interested are right for you. And I think that's the most important thing at the moment. The Ucat and the Bmat, you can start focusing a lot more on them, usually after you've done your AS exams or after you've done the exams that are important for your predicted grades.
Cool. So one of the participants here asked, how much time did you get in the Bmat and Ucat, and how much time did you spend on each question and each section? How do you deal with the time management part?
So how much time preparing, or how much time per question?
No, actually, in the exam, I think they're asking in the exam, how did you manage to do it? Because I know it's very time precious. How did you manage to do it very fast? And how did you manage to work up to that pace?
So for both the Ucat and the Bmat, it's so important that whatever practice you do is under timed conditions. The questions themselves are not that difficult. It's the timing. So you've got to start immediately doing things under time conditions, even if that means you start getting 25% at the beginning in each of the sections. Because if you don't put yourself under that time pressure, you won't learn quickly. Whenever you're practicing for both the Ucat and the Bmat, the most important thing is actually to be uncomfortable, okay? You want to be in a situation where you're constantly learning and improving, or else it's a waste of time. You're just practicing things you're strong at. And so immediately start with time practice, even if it's a bit uncomfortable at the beginning. And then eventually you will identify a number of shortcuts on the way that you can approach questions. For example, in QR, and you've got to remember for both the BMAT and the Ucat, they're multiple choice questions. So in many cases, you don't even need to get the exact answer. And what I mean by that is, if there's a QR calculation and you find that all the options, all the multiple choice options you've got are actually quite far away and quite like they're not close to each other, then you can be very, like you can start rounding things up and down. You can start taking shortcuts, which means that even if you don't get the exact answer after your calculations, you'll still be able to select the correct options from the multiple choice. Yeah, so that's the best thing to do. I think there's a question that says, did you use Metaphy for both Ucat and Bmat? No, I use Metaphy for Ucat. I would actually not recommend using Metaphy for Bmat. And the reason for that is Bmat is a written exam. It's not a computer-based exam. And so Metaphy isn't the best resource for a written exam. For Bmat, a really useful book is the 800 Bmat questions or something, which I'll try and bring up. Again, don't worry too much about this. Like, you have plenty of time, or 700 Bmat questions, and just past papers. You've just got to like bang out those past papers as you would for like a GCSE or A-level topic.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. I just wanted to ask a question about the personal statement. I'll start by asking, first of all, when did you start writing your personal statement or start drafting it? And also I want to ask about like a kind of structure for it. Is there any structure that you'd recommend or that you thought was particularly effective that you used?
Yeah, definitely. So I think I started my personal statement quite late. That's not too much of a problem because like as long as it's done at the end, that's the most important thing, and it's done to the level you want it to be done to. So I think I started mine about, actually no, I didn't start it too late. I started about a month before the end of year 12, because by that point our teachers wanted like drafts and stuff. But having said that, I think it's important to start preparing to do the work, which will then eventually be put in your personal statement. And I'll clarify that a bit more when I start discussing the structure. So the structure that I've usually found that works best with people, and it's the structure that I followed, is you have your introduction paragraph, of course. And then if you're applying for a scientifically based university, for example, Oxford, Cambridge, UCL, Imperial, perhaps even somewhere like Barts, then you want to have your first paragraph being a super curricular paragraph. And what I mean by that is you want to be discussing books you've read. You want to be discussing perhaps even lectures that you've went to. And if you've seen an online lecture, that still counts. You want to be discussing, I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but there are things called Moocs, which are like these massive online courses. So if you've done any of those, you want to include it in that paragraph. For those who are applying to Oxford and Cambridge, it might also be useful to talk about, and this is, no one's expecting you to do this, not even those unis, but it really differentiates you if you start discussing things like research papers. So if you actually read research papers and discuss them a bit. If you're involved in societies, this is it, like medical societies, this is a good place to talk about it. So that's the supercurricular paragraph. And what I find also works really well is if you have a theme that unites all the stuff that you're talking about. So, for example, back when I was in school, I was really interested in cancer and genetics. And so I made that actually probably the theme of my personal statement, but primarily the theme of the supercurricular paragraph. And so I talked first of all about a DNA essay competition that I entered, and then I kind of linked it. So I said, this inspired me to read up more about cancer. And so I read this book. Having gained this idea from the book, I then did an online course on the idea. Being fascinated with the online course, I then attended a lecture. And that structure really makes you seem like quite a kind of inquisitive and passionate person. So someone who's really interested about the subject. So that's it for the supercurricular. And then what I find after, which works best, is to have a single paragraph on your work experience and the things that you've learned from your work experience. Again, if you want, you can kind of embed a few books which are related to the work experience. So I remember I read a book called The Checklist Manifesto by Atul Gawande, which was talking about how we can kind of improve clinical outcomes by using a checklist-based method. And I talked about how actually I saw that being used in a surgery, and I was like, oh, that's quite cool. After work experience, volunteering. So talk about care home, if you've been involved in any volunteering, even things like tutoring. So if you've been tutoring other people for free, if you've been involved in anything to do with COVID-19 volunteering, that would be great. Any volunteering, and try to make it actually different. So I would include the classic care home, but every single medical student's going to include like the care home volunteering. So try and see if you can do something else as well, just to stand out. On the topic of standing out, I feel like I don't know, but I feel like almost everyone is going to talk about the coronavirus. Try not to talk about the coronavirus, just because every medical student's going to be like, oh, you know, I witnessed the work of the paramedics as they risk their lives to, I don't know, virus. And yeah, it's great, it's brilliant, but it's going to turn into a really quick cliche. And tutors are like, whoever's looking at your application is going to get bored of coronavirus very, very quickly. So I wouldn't make the central theme of your personal statement be COVID-19. If you did do some volunteering with COVID-19, feel free to include it, but I wouldn't emphasize on it. So quick recap, we talked about supercurricular, then work experience, then volunteering, and then I would end it. So just before the conclusion, I would talk about your extracurricular activities. So any school societies, if you're involved in your school as like a house captain or a school captain or something like that. If you gave any presentations in school, or just any extracurricular activities, just to show that you're kind of like a normal person. Any football games, I don't know if you play football, talk about it briefly, and stuff like that. And then end it with just a simple, with both the introductions and the conclusions, you want to make them quite short, because they're not the main focus of the personal statement.
Right, thank you. And just for like the final section of the final part of this section of the Q&A, one major question actually, and it's quite recurring, is how did you prepare for BMAT section 3, like the essay section? And also, what did you get in each test?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so in terms of prepping for the essays, the essay section is probably the least important section. And that's because it's very easy. So it's out of 5. It's very easy to get 3 out of 5 as long as you follow the instructions on the test paper. And actually, let me get a BMAT question as an example. So I'll get like a BMAT question, sorry, a BMAT test paper example. And I'll show you exactly what I mean by following the question exactly. So I'll just share my screen. So here we have a BMAT section paper. It's a specimen paper. Usually you'll have half an hour to write an essay. Well, you will have half an hour to write an essay. In fact, yeah, so it says your answer must be written on the answer sheet and in English, which, yeah, don't write it in another language. And they'll give you a number of questions. So they'll give you 3 or 4 questions. Usually it's, I think they've reduced it to 3, it used to be 4. And you have to pick a single essay to write. So let's say that okay, so the first one is a little learning is a dangerous thing. Oh, that's quite cool. Our belief in any particular natural law cannot have a safer basis than our unsuccessful critical attempts to refute it. It is ridiculous to treat the living body as a mechanism. So let's say I want to do a little learning is a dangerous thing, which is quite a cool question. As long as you address those 3 questions in one way or another in your essay, you will get 3 out of 5. So as long as you explain what the statement means, okay, you then argue to the contrary, even if your argument isn't too good, and show that a little learning is not dangerous. And then after you do that, you answer to what extent do you think learning can be a dangerous thing. If you do all those 3, even if you do them like awfully, you will get 3 out of 5. If you write the best essay in the world, and actually if you write the best essay in the world, they'll probably let you off. But if you write an amazing essay, but you don't address those 3 things, you will be capped at a 2. You cannot get higher than a 2. And so it's extremely important you cover those things. Getting 3 out of 5 is usually enough for every single university. So whether it be, because like the essay set, except maybe UCL, because UCL focuses quite a bit on the essay, they'll definitely be enough for Imperial, Oxford and Cambridge, because they don't focus too much on the essay section. And so if you do those 3 things, you'd have guaranteed it. Other than that, I don't think there's much you can do which will directly aid with the essay. There are a number of things which you can do which will definitely indirectly aid. Those are things like reading the news, just being creative and kind of reading a lot of different things. Yeah, just being very inquisitive and kind of questioning things. But other than that, this is more of questions that kind of test your outlook and your perspective on things that you've usually developed over a lifetime. So it's very difficult to prepare explicitly for section 3 of the BMAT. In terms of my score, so I did all right, but I think I could have done much better. I kind of did, for both the Ucat and the Bmat, I kind of had panic attacks for some reason, which I definitely would not recommend. So for the Ucat, I got an average of 765, which is, if you're getting above 700, that's all you need. Okay, that's for whatever Ucat uni you're applying to. And I kind of fell quite a bit on the VR. So with VR, I got 590. With QR, with decision making, I got 710. With QR, I got 890, and with abstract reasoning, I got 870. And then section 1 of situational judgment. Yeah, I kind of had a panic attack with VR. Would not recommend. BMAT again. So with BMAT, I got 7 in section. So the way that BMAT works, actually, shall I just explain how they both work? Because I think it's silly of me to just give scores without explaining how it works. for both of those exams, they are spread across something called a normal distribution, which I can't really find an image for the UCAT. But what that means is approximately 600 is the average, which means that 50% of people will get below 600 and 50% will get above 600. 700 is a score in the top. If you get a score of 700 or more, you get a score within the top 10% of the country. So if you got 700, you've got a score within the top 10% of all the people who take the exam. If you get 800 plus, you've got a score within the top 1% of all the people taking the exam. And so you only really need to get 680, and getting 680 would probably guarantee you interviews at all the Ucat medical schools, assuming that the rest of your like A levels and GCSEs and personal statement is fine. 700 would definitely guarantee you any Ucat medical schools, and so on. With BMAT, it's the same system. So the average person would get a score of 5. The top about 10 to 20% would get a score of 6. The top 5 to 10% would get a score of about 7. And I'm just, they have a far better normal distribution curve. This is what a normal distribution looks like. So I'm sorry, I'm using terms that you guys have almost definitely not learnt about yet, but you'll cover them in school. A normal distribution is something that looks like a bell, and it's how a lot of things in life are distributed. So if we look to the distribution of something like height, it follows a normal distribution where most people would be within the middle. There'll be a few people who are extremely tall and a few people who are extremely short, but most people would be found within the middle. And that's how both the UCAT and the BMAT works, where most people will get an average of about 5. A few people would get, so this isn't extremely clear, but for example, this is a section 2. Most people would get about 4.5. Some people do really well, get 5.5. Few would get 6. Few would get 7, and it just goes like that. So I got 7 for section 1, 5.9 for section 2, and 3.5A for the essay section. And for the essay section, the way it works is that 2 people mark your essay. They will each give you a score, and then you get the average of that score. So I was marked as a 3 by one person, and a 4 by the other. Most people get 3 in the essay. And this is how the rest are distributed. So sorry for rambling on a bit, but yeah, that's how it kind of works.
Thank you. I think that was very useful. So someone's asked, what UCAT score were you getting when you first started practicing? So, you know, obviously you said that the best way to revise the UCAT is by practicing. So did you notice a clear sort of increase when you started doing past papers? And yeah.
So right at the beginning, before even much practice, I did a mock, and what I got in the mock was, I think, 630, which is about average, which shows that you can do it. You can get quite a lot of improvement with practice. And then based on that mock, I kind of focused on my weakest subjects or weakest topics, and focused most of my time on that. So yeah, you can definitely make a lot of progress. I think I would just keep practicing, and yeah, you can make a lot of progress.
Okay, yeah, thank you. And so we're going to move on now, I think, about to do interviews. So I just wanted to ask, how do the Oxbridge interviews, or specifically the Oxford interview, differ from, you know, other medical schools? Because obviously I've heard they're much more academic and scientific based, but what does that actually mean in terms of how you prepare for them, and kind of what to expect when you get there?
Yeah, so most other medical universities or medical interviews will test whether you're a good people's person. So they will ask you questions like, why are you interested in medicine? How would you approach a given scenario involving a patient, and things like that. With Oxford and Cambridge, they're a lot more scientifically based. And so what they'll usually do is actually they'll give you a problem, and it will be a very, very basic problem. But like it'll be something that you kind of, you can, so the problem itself isn't basic, but it'll be something where it'll be kind of like using information that you already understand. And what they'll want you to do is they'll want you to try and solve the problem with your GCSE and A-level knowledge. And they're not expecting you necessarily to get to the answer. They want to see two things, okay? They want to make sure that you can think. And what I mean by that is you haven't just memorized the content, you've actually understood it. And so you can kind of be a lot more adaptable with the information you're presented. Because if you memorize something, you're not very adaptable with the information, you just know it. That's the first thing. They want to test that you think. And the second thing is they want to test that you're teachable. And that means that, you know, you can interact with your tutors in a positive way. You can build on the criticism that they give you. You can build on the information they give you. In terms of preparation, I would just say whatever you guys are about to cover in AS, make sure you truly understand it, okay? So with GCSEs, you can definitely get away with memorizing stuff. With AS, probably you could also like get away with memorizing stuff. But if you want to apply to Oxford or Cambridge, don't just memorize your content, question what you're learning, and make sure that you truly understand the basics and the concepts behind something. So understand, I don't know, if you're covering something like the immune system, try and understand why certain white blood cells work in a certain way, why certain antibodies are complementary to one thing and not another thing, and try to get the deeper level of understanding that perhaps you didn't really need to cover at GCSEs.
Okay, yeah, and I just wanted to, adding on to that, so obviously you said revise your AS stuff and memorize it, make sure you know that. Do you think you need to, because obviously when you do the interviews, you won't have covered the entire A-level syllabus, i.e. the A2 content. Do you think we should learn that or look ahead to that? And also, do you think it's worth looking at content outside of the A-level syllabus entirely? Like, you know, just basic knowledge about diseases or whatever. Do you think it's worth doing that?
So in terms of AS, I think if you've got a very good understanding of AS, that should be enough. If you do have the time, it might be useful to cover the human or medical aspects of the A2 content very briefly. Just make sure you've got an idea. For example, things like action potentials, which is usually an A2, would just be good to have an idea of how that works. I wouldn't worry too much about looking outside of the content. Again, they're not testing what knowledge you know. They're testing how you can use knowledge you've learned from AS and GCSEs to solve problems that you wouldn't have come across. And so the problems that they give you will be completely random and will be probably things you would have never read about anyway. So it's far better for you to kind of have a good understanding of your GCSE and AS content so that you can be versatile with your approach to the questions, rather than trying to do what a lot of students do, which is read expansively but very superficially on a lot of topics, so that if they're asked that topic, they can somehow immediately know the answer. Because actually, if you know the answer, they will move on to another question. They don't care about whether you know the answer or not. They want to see the way you approach a question.
Right. I think that's actually all the questions. Thank you so much, Michael. This has been really insightful. Thank you so much for being here. Honestly, I mean, I'm pretty sure lots of people want to go to Oxford and, you know, emulate your success and do everything. I think we might have 1 or 2 questions about A-levels and EPQ actually. Thank you very much. I think I have a question about A-levels and EPQ. Does it matter if you don't do the EPQ? Is it something that matters so much as compared to doing a different type of enrichment?
Not really. It's not. I think it's. It does help to do the EPQ, but it's not. It doesn't really matter too much. Yeah, I think that's just it in a nutshell. So if you can do the EPQ, it would be useful because they can bring it up in the interview, especially in topic, but it won't negatively affect your application if you don't do the EPQ.
Okay, yeah, thank you. And also, I think we'll just ask a couple more questions and then we can wrap up. So I just wanted to ask, in terms of A-level revision, because obviously your A-level predicted grades are quite important for your application. So for AS and A2 and A-level revision, how did you go about revising and how did that differ from your GCSE revision?
Yeah, I think with GCSEs you can cram a lot, which is kind of what I did. Would not recommend, but you can. With A-levels, it's best not to cram because there's a lot of content and it usually requires a greater depth of understanding. I would try and go over your A-level content regularly. I would do some research into useful studying techniques. So things like there's techniques called active recall, spaced repetition, even things that a really useful way of testing your understanding is something called the Feynman technique, which is your ability to explain something to a 5-year-old. So if you use those techniques effectively, there is no reason why you can't retain all your AS knowledge going into A2, and you actually find that preparing for things like interviews are much easier. Because based on that, just a quick note, the beginning of year 13 and the summer period of year 12, so after you do year 12, is a stressful period, especially if you're applying for both Ucat and Bmat unis, because there's so much going on. You're prepping for your Ucat, you're prepping for your Bmat. You're also doing work based on based on personal statement. Right after you do that, you've got interviews, and you're balancing all this stuff whilst you're covering year 13 content. So you want to try and be as organized as possible in year 12.
Okay, yeah, thank you. And I just asked one about extracurricular activities. So which extra and super curricular activities did you do, and which would you kind of recommend to the people here? And maybe like, you know, leadership positions and that kind of thing. What kind of thing do you think would be, you know, what would be appreciated by universities when you're, you know, if you wrote about them in your personal statement or something?
Yeah, sure. So with super curricular activities, depending on the unis, you want to try and hopefully read some books if you can. You want to perhaps do a Mooc, go to a lecture if you can. Again, those are all really useful things. Just anything which allows you to kind of explore the area within medicine that you're interested in, because you want to kind of seem like someone who really understands that medicine is a field with lots and lots of different disciplines, and that you've actually found 1 or 2 disciplines that you're kind of really fascinated by. In terms of extracurriculars, don't worry at all about doing things like, I don't know, joining a sports team or stuff. They really don't care about that stuff. So they don't care too much about the actual activities. They care far more about the skills you gain from the activities you do. So you want to try and convey things like empathy, which you can do from volunteering and work experience, leadership, which you can do from school leadership positions, whether it be leading a society, being a prefect, whatever it is. You want to show so compassion, which is kind of linked with empathy. You want to show organizational skills, which again is kind of linked to leadership. You want to show teamwork. So there's a number of kind of medical kind of keywords that they look out for. So you want to try and do the skills which effectively convey those kind of medical key terms.
Cool. Thank you, Michael, for the amazing talk, honestly. And I mean, it was really helpful. And actually, we've just had a comment personally. It says, thank you so much. It was really insightful. So thank you so much. Obviously, we'd really love to also be able to go to Oxford University, become medical students there. That'd be really cool. And you've really showed us how we could try and do that. So thank you very much for coming. Just a quick question. If we were to share your picture on Instagram, would that be okay with you?
Yeah, that'd be completely fine.
Cool. We'll make you a celebrity overnight. Thank you very much for everything.
Thanks, guys.
And we hope to talk to you in the future. Thank you, everyone, for coming, and bye.
Definitely. Thanks, guys. Yeah, and keep working hard. Yeah. See you later, hopefully. See you guys.